Hi, Wendy,
Hi Mark, how are you?
and welcome to our webinar series.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And I've just discovered that you're in Queensland, which is great.
Yes, moved many years in Victoria.
Yeah,
Moved up here for the warm weather
yeah, don't
about
blame
years ago, and in a rural area which has
you.
come with its own intriguing, how do I put it, learnings.
Yeah,
Never had tank water before. Never had pythons on the kitchen bench, which
yeah,
at 3 a.m. in the morning, which I have now
yeah.
had.
Fascinating, fascinating.
And green tree frogs are really loud. But no, really nice area.
Great.
Are you still based in Melbourne,
No,
Mark?
I'm
Or?
in Adelaide. I've moved back to Adelaide in 2022 to be with my new granddaughter.
Oh, how
Yeah,
lovely.
so that's wonderful. That ages me. But as I introduce you in a second, it's going to age me more. So we'll talk about when we first met and how long we've known each other, which is quite a long time.
It
So
is quite a long time, yes.
yeah, so welcome everybody to this webinar today. We're going to be talking about skills and attributes. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Kaurna people. We're all on different lands across Australia, and I want to acknowledge our First Nations people and also uh, their elders, past, present, and emerging. And uh, before we get going. So there we are. And welcome anyone with the First Nations heritage to our meeting today. Um, Now, Wendy, you and I worked on ANZ's first LMS-based compliance project together for the ANZ Bank, didn't we? That goes back more than 20 years. And
Yes.
I remember that, and we met. And at that time, I was working for the supplier of the, well, I owned the supplier of the LMS company at the time. Was then called TechWorks, now called WorldLearn. And you were working in transitions too, and eventually ANZ changed platforms and so on, which was a bit sad. But I always remember we enjoyed working together in those days.
Yes, it was a great start, and
Yeah,
ANZ were one of the early adopters of online learning
yeah,
and compliance. So great opportunity to find out a whole lot of stuff.
yeah. And here we are again, me working with an early adoption idea. But thank you for coming today. And I just want to also acknowledge your experience since then, years at Deakin University working with Professor Beverly Oliver and on innovation in a university context. Fantastic work you did all those years. And now you're in consulting land, and I'm sure, and adding value and as a thought leader and consultant type, just follow you on LinkedIn every day. So it's great that we still got that connection.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So welcome. Um, we might kick off with our first sort of question. As we know, this is an interview style uh, webinar. And I wondered if there's a good place to start might be just looking at organisations, because you've been in corporate world, you've been in large university, innovative university. Why do you think organisations find skills and skill gaps a challenge for their human resources?
Hey, that's a lovely big question to start us off with. But I think one of the bigger problems we have with that is could be probably summed up by there's a lack of skills literacy, and it's not just within organisations, but it's with people. It's even within our education providers. You know, they often talk in learning outcomes instead of skills. I mean, obviously that's not the case in VET,
Mm,
but I think overall, there's just a real, people struggle to put into words what a skill actually is and what it does. I mean, I think you only need to read through job advertisements, and they're often more around the tasks they want people to do rather than the skills that they need.
mm,
So I think there's a real gap there. And what has been fascinating is as things like rich skills descriptors become more common, you
mm,
start to see people using them.
mm,
And I think as we start to move towards sort of a language of skills, that's going to be one of the differences there.
mm,
So that I think that sort of overall skills literacy is I think why organisations struggle with putting good position descriptions together that actually have the skills, and secondly, struggle also in the recruitment. But I think there's also a skills gap within their own organisations because they don't necessarily know who is able to do what. So they know what tasks people can do, but it's not tasks that are transferable. It's the skills. What can I do here, and how can I transfer that? So I think that's sort of two of the gaps. One is around just not even being able to understand what skills their own people have, and secondly, really poor or not being able to really clearly articulate what a skill actually is.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, a task is a skill in a sense, you know, so it's easy. You can understand why people get mixed up. But I think you would agree, wouldn't you, that what we're talking about with skills is an aggregation of tasks and context and so on.
Oh, very much so. I mean, if you take a task, you know, answering customer inquiries, then you've got, okay, the ability to answer the phone, but then you want to, but if to do that well, you're going to probably need an understanding of complaint handling. You're going to need to understand some of the principles of good customer service. And so then you're starting to get more into skills, and then there's, you know, context around what, you know, what how upset are my customers, or what help do they need, and you know, how high stakes is the service. So I think there's a whole range of things there. Yeah.
And layered, and then there's the attributes, right, that go with skills. A lot of skills frameworks, the Australian training packages don't do this, but a lot of them have, well, they do in a way because they have performance criteria, but a lot of skills frameworks have a kind of KSA structure, you know, knowledge, skills, attributes. And the notion of attributes, like how good you are at something. How do you think, what's good, better, best mean, you know, in that context? How do you think a good skills literacy thinks about, you know, those attributes, behavioural attributes or other attributes?
It's a really interesting question, because if you think about good, better, best, there's a number of different ways you can answer it. So obviously, if you say you're skilled at communication, then you can understand what a really, really good communicator can do, or what a, you know, as opposed to what a good communicator can do. So I think there is gradations within it, but I think I don't want to sort of say that they should be done at the same time. Like, I think someone who is, say, only a couple of years into their role, then are they good? Are they good for their role, as opposed to are they the best communicator? So I think if you're starting to talk about good, better, or best, you also have to bring in the concept of levels. So someone who is the best graduate communicator may still not be as good as a senior manager, but they're the best they're the best sort of in their peer group or in their cohort. So I think this idea of good, better, and best, we need to think about what it is, and again, coming back to the context. Like, if my role is to give presentations, then the communication skills I need are probably going to be far higher than if my role is a different role, where, you know, where communication isn't as vital. So there's a whole range of ways in which you can look at good, better, best. But I'll come back to sort of a negative. I think if you're going to look at skills, if you're good, you're good. You're not good, but a bit, you know. So I don't think there should be gradations. You know, there's this idea of competence. If you're a good communicator and you're good at this level, then you're good. So I think it's interesting to think of those scales. I know, just reminded me of a really good example, the Scottish qualifications framework. They did a lot of work around setting levels, and the idea is that we often overhire, in the sense that you say, right, well, we use things like, you know, you need a degree. Maybe you don't need a degree. Maybe you only need 1 year of university education, or maybe you need a diploma. And so there's this tendency to say, you know, we want the best communicator, but do you really need the best, or you just need someone proficient?
Mm. It's
And
an
so,
interesting question.
yeah,
Look, Grant and Ron who are on the call today have raised an interesting element. Like, of course, Grant, I agree that for some tasks, you need multiple skills. So you can understand how literacy becomes a bit challenging because very quickly we get to a matrix, don't we? And matrices, I think you need a certain skill to understand matrices, as a human.
yes, and I think that is one of the and I think that is one of the difficulties because we can be glib and sort of say, oh, we need greater skills literacy, but I think you're right in that also there is also an element there that it's not simple. It can be quite complex when we start thinking of how things layer in and the different levels. And I remember working with a sort of a capability framework, and we were looking at it, and we were saying for a job, well, okay, for this particular job, we want your innovation to be at least a 4, but your influence, it doesn't matter if it's only a 2, and so you were looking through and saying
Yeah.
what level do you need of each of these things within a skill. So it's also quite interesting is you might say, well, this is a sort of an emerging position, but that doesn't mean that you want all the skills to be emerging. You might want them to be really good at a couple of things, and then everything else is then developing as that person matures in their role.
And look, Ron makes a very good point that, some of the behavior and proficiency rest with the person rather than the skill. Like it's about their personal motivation, their personal experience, their contribution, all sorts of other elements you could describe as elements of proficiency, which are not necessarily simple attributes to a skill. They could just be about the human. So it really does get messy quickly. And I mean, you and I talked out of session about this, that I think one of our goals is to come back to some lowest common denominator that we can work with so that people can get better at least understanding what a skill is and what they do. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I think so. I've been watching with interest as people have been um, starting to use AI to write job ads.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
actually seen a lot of tools that help to take sort of like descriptions of tasks or a position description and then put them into skills. Whereas what I've seen with a lot of the job ads using AI, it's just sort of reinforcing some of the things that we've done in the past. It's using sentences like, oh, we need you to be a great communicator.
Mm,
But it doesn't then go down to the next step. You're going to need to communicate ideas to all levels of stakeholders, or we want you to be able to effectively communicate to large groups of people. So
mm,
it's that next step along of actually doing it. And I think at that level, it is going to be something that develops. It's not going to happen overnight.
mm,
But as more and more companies start to use the concept of skills-based hiring,
mm,
and I know at the moment that's been driven by a few big companies,
mm,
and even the ones I've seen are probably still being a bit sort of generalistic, but the idea is where they're moving away from saying, you need to have a particular qualification to we need you to be able to demonstrate the skills. I
mm,
think that's where the idea of sort of things like credentials and evidence,
mm,
how do you get the two to match up so
mm,
that the learner is using the language of skills and the
mm.
employer is using the language of skills,
Yeah.
and whatever mechanism in the middle can connect those far more easily.
Well, there's a lot of work going on to try and find a common language. I must say, well, again, my views on this, that I think with the information science we're getting now and with the AI, what we can do is map things that are not the same. So we've always had this problem of apples and oranges, in a skill definition. But we're doing a lot of work, as you know, on that in that area. How do you map things? How do you map dislike things? Um, do you think we want to have a common skills taxonomy, or do you think we want to get better at mapping? What are your thoughts?
um, Given that there's probably been many, many years where people have been trying to have a common skills taxonomy and haven't,
Mm,
I'm actually going to say is that I just don't think that's a realistic. I just don't think it's a realistic goal because people are going to interpret things differently, and even if we come up with a common taxonomy in one language, it's still going to be different in a different language.
Mm.
There, I think what we need to get more comfortable at is systems that allow us to map across it. I remember I got an opportunity to play with a little demo of a skills mapper, and it was one where you could talk to it and tell it what to the UK and to a framework in the US. And it was really nice because I had a little table and it said, right, in the US, this is how it would be described. In the UK, this is, and then in the OECD.
Mm.
And that was really quite fascinating. And for me, it was a real eye opener because I thought, why would I bother try to come up or say we're going to use this one
Mm.
when it was so easy to compare them? And
Mm.
looking at it, it was a good comparison, and it was an AI comparison, and it worked.
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, I think that's where we're all heading to some degree with these problems, is to try and make it a little more wizard-like for people to use, rather than lump a whole lot of complexity on. Because we love the complexity, right? Like I love it, but that's not everyone's cup of tea.
No, no, it's not. And then I sort of think of a lot of the conversations that I've had around things like using skills and skills-based hiring. They've
Mm.
centered around, big HR departments and big HR systems. Yet, in reality, in Australia, our biggest employer is small businesses, and they're not going to be able to plug in to that. So, creating complex systems that need really big enterprise engines to run them, I don't think that's the answer.
Mm.
We need simpler tools that just make things easy to use. um, and we also need the translations because
Mm.
I often talk about if we're going to use things like digital credentials as evidence of skills, they need to be both human readable and machine readable.
Mm.
And so, you can't, you've got to have both elements in there. Otherwise, you just risk having someone characterized by a whole lot of metadata that
Yeah.
is, impenetrable for the individual.
Well, we can loop back on the RSD conversation from earlier, can't we? That if we can find some kind of machine readable standard, that even if I mean, again, this is work we're doing, even if we put a lot more in it, like a huge volume of things, at least it's all in the same machine readable language, so you can work with the data.
Yeah, and very much so. I mean, I think in this, if we're talking about skills and attributes, it's around making sure that we've got a standardized way of describing them, so
Mm.
that we're able to do that. And as you say, and then we do have systems that can then make sense and match those things up. Yeah.
Mm. So that's again, this is a question a bit from left field, but the notion that what we need is granularity sometimes, but context as well, right?
Yeah.
If we're going to do this, and I just want to invite anyone's on the call. We're going to have time for a couple of questions from you in a moment. If you want to put one in the chat, we'll pick that up. But yeah. So the notion of whatever. I've just seen a really good idea in the chat. Again, thanks, Ron. Around that, maybe a national skills taxonomy needs to be a framework itself. Something that standardizes on RSDs or open badges standard or some other standard approach. If they were talking about frameworks rather than a list, I think we'd be getting somewhere.
I think so, because I look at all the taxonomies that already exist, and you sort of think, what's the point of writing yet another one
Yeah.
to just put your own differentiation on it? Just from an Australian perspective, one of the things that I talk about when I go overseas, a lot of people talk about, they say how lucky we are to have things like the National Qualifications Framework, to have sort of, national systems. a national micro-credentials framework, I'm thinking of Canada. Every single province in Canada has its own curriculum, has its own qualifications. US, there's sort of no standardization. And so I think, we need to remember how lucky we are that we have some of these things, but let's not go down the path of saying, well, then we need to make more and more of them and more of our own, because as I said, the OECD, the UN, that they're all working in this space. And the other thing is, we talk about mobility within Australia, but if we start adding in mobility for people coming in with external qualifications, trying to leverage off the existing good frameworks or good taxonomies that are there, I think makes much more sense than redeveloping our own.
It's interesting. Again, in the chat, we've had mentioned, Sophia, which is a wonderful framework, but it's also great in its own contexts and not suitable for everything. If we see that, because one of the beauties of the Australian training package system is that it deals with every trade, it deals with every job that it doesn't, but it's vast. I think more than 15,000 competencies. That's a lot, so yeah, that's great. Let's look to another question, maybe about RPL. Like, I've seen some stats that that I can source for people if they want. I just can't remember the sources right now. Something that if we upskill internally versus hire, it's a 70% reduction in cost, right? And if we recognise skills, Australia has a skills problem that in GDP terms, a skills gap problem, GDP terms, I've seen a number of $102 billion, that if we could solve our skills gap problem, that would be the GDP impact. These are big numbers. How important do you think recognition of what we know is, whether it's formal RPL or just visibility, increasing the visibility and what skills people have? How important do you think that is, and what are some of your views about it?
Yeah, look, I think it's actually really important. At a few of the conferences we've been to around recognition, it was really interesting because people flipped it around saying we don't have a skills gap, we have a recognition gap.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of people who can do lots of things, but because they have no way of documenting it and they have no way of being able to sort of provide evidence for it, it's very hard for them to make the claim. But I think, and so, I think back to what we used to call them soft skills, and they became transferable skills, and now they're durable skills. Those alone are probably, even if we could just document everybody who has those, that would make a huge difference, because there's many jobs that rely on the durable skills. They want people, with good, analytical thinking, problem solving, teamwork, collaboration. And those are often not honed through formal education. They're honed through experience. But when it comes to RPL, it's an interesting question, because where RPL is used is entry into formal qualifications. Yet what we're talking about here is recognition of prior learning to give the individual evidence that they can then share. And I think that's and I think it's a really interesting notion. A little while ago, one of the articles I wrote was about, how cool would it be if every single LMS in the corporate world actually gave people evidence of what they'd done learning at work and added that to their formal learning records. But even going one step further, we're not going to solve the skills gap unless we actually get better at recognizing skills. And many of those skills are not from formal education. So we need something different, and we need RPL that the end goal is to give the person evidence, not necessarily to put them into a formal qualification.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because it moves the power from the institutional setting to the individual and their life, what's meaningful for them, which I think, I mean, we've talked about empowering learners. I've got a bit of a joke about that too often that's about a university building a gymnasium or a swimming pool or something, which somehow is about empowering. I don't know what that is, but being learner centric, right? So, but empowering learners has to be bigger than that, doesn't it? Like the empowerment needs to be a real shift in power.
Oh, look, it does. I mean, and if we go back and look at it from a data point of view, there is lots and lots of data about my skills and my capability existing in the world, but I don't have access to most of it because it's locked away in LMSs, it's locked away in staff systems. If I wish I'd saved all my paper certificates because I could demonstrate what I'd at least what courses I'd done, but this idea of learner agency, or even taking it one step further, just individual agency and having access to your own data. If you lose your copy of your transcript, you actually have to go back to the organisation. You have to request it again. Sometimes you're even charged for it. So I think the time is really right to say, and again, I'm thinking of the National Skills Passport. And I saw someone put recognition of existing skills, and how cool would it be if I had my own passport and I could collect evidence both formally. A really good example is when you leave a job and you go for a new job, you write your resume and then you give 3 references and then those people attest, but it's fleeting. And once again, I don't have it after, the organisation gets the benefit of that. I don't get to keep it.
Well, there's an element of trust in all of this too, isn't there? And finding trusted sources of evidence, but also systems that support trusted outcomes, or trusted access. There's a lot of work to do ahead of us, I think. I think it's wonderful. I just wonder if there's one more question we'll look to. One of the questions, a good question, is about ONET and the new, is it OSCAR, is the new Australian thing, and how much they could inform a skills taxonomy. Maybe they're a bridge, thanks, and maybe they're a bridge between, the job description world and the learning world, which is, I think, one of the difficulties is there's not enough bridges between the two worlds. What do you think about that?
Look, I would agree. I mean, in the sense that you almost have three different viewpoints when it comes to the language around this. You've got the individual, their own, what they describe. So they want to be able to describe something in sort of, fairly simple or plain language. Then if you're doing formal education, you've got things like your learning outcomes, and they're quite formal and structured a particular way. And then you've got your rich skill descriptors from the organisation of saying this is what you were able to do. And I think we need to start thinking, rather than trying to say, well, we need one language that covers all of them, we need to be comfortable that a credential or a piece of evidence might have a plain language description that means that I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It might have academic learning outcomes if they're relevant, and it should have the rich skills descriptors that talk to the employment world. And the beauty of digital evidence is you can fit all that in. You don't have to worry about fitting it on a single page. It all just in the metadata.
It's a database, a portfolio. You can do that. I remember writing an article once called "What Do You Do with a Million-Line Resume?" It can be overwhelming, of course. Well, I want to thank you today. Now you're off to EdTech in Paris, aren't you, in the next couple of weeks?
That's correct. Yes.
And we're hoping for some exciting news about the same open recognition event, maybe having some news in Australia, but we're not announcing anything yet. But look, where's that at?
Yep, no, we're working on it because there's a number of us that often go to the international conferences, and we'd love to be able to bring that back to this side of the world so that we can start to have those same conversations, but more importantly, bring the different groups, bring the education sector, industry, and individuals themselves, bring them all together to try and tackle these things, because it's got to be solved by all groups.
That's great. Well, I want to thank our attendees today who've made a wonderful contribution to the conversation. We'll be keeping all those chats. And Wendy, I want to thank you for your time today, and look forward to working with you on these difficult, knotty problems about how do we make the complex simple for people. But great to see you, and lovely that we're both still working in this overall goal together of making things easier for people. It's a really nice space to be in.
Lovely. And it's been lovely to reconnect and have this conversation.
Yeah, great, Wendy. Thanks, everyone, for attending today. And we'll see you at the next one, which will be on the 5th of November with the wonderful Deb Carr. So we look forward to seeing people then.
Brilliant.